Good morning, everyone. We're convening. Whoops. To members and audience and those that are watching us statewide, good morning and aloha. Prior to us to beginning our committee hearing today, we've asked our distinguished Representative Faye Hanohano, who is from the Big Island, to give us an ole and a pule. If the audience will please stand.
Mana papalua ho mai ho mai ka papalua pule kako ko mako makuelo ko kalani halano no ki ia ako ana e ho mai ka ia mako no ki ia papahana e hawi ia mako i ka iki ame kana au e ala ka ia mako ina mea e ka pai aku na mea pono ole e malama ia mako ina la apau e malama ia mako i ka mako hoi ana i ka mako ole makaino ka makua ke keiki uhane no ka mea no ke apuni a me ka mana a me ka onani ia maulo aku a me mahalo no hoi la.
Okay, thank you. So with us, our committee hearing is, let me read. Do you have that? Do you have a committee hearing?
Everything I do.
You don't have it? Is that funny? We're meeting with the Committee on Water and Land, the Committee on Education, and the Committee on Finance for the first hearing today on the bill that has been introduced by the administration regarding 21st century schools. And we asked the governor to please come and talk to us because I think this initiative from his administration, it's important to hear from him what he believes about this bill and why we should support the bill. So with that, Governor Abercrombie, would you please?
Thank you very kindly, Cindy. I'm very, very grateful. Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
With your permission, chairs and members, I would like to submit my testimony to you and just make a couple of comments on it. Let it stand as is. Okay. And I appreciate it. I know you have a long agenda today. I brought with me just some summary of the files that I've been putting together on the idea of 21st century schools conceptually and how it might play out in Hawaii. My essential point in doing so is to indicate to you that this is not something that has been conjured up in a brief period of time, or that it does not and has not had extensive conversation and discussion in the community at large, because of the interests in what we can do and what we should be doing with public school lands. Just a couple of items in that. Some of the lands, and Ray LaRue of the Department of Education will be able to explicate on this a bit later in his testimony, I'm sure. Part of the 250 plus school sites in the state and the potential for perhaps up to a dozen more schools in the state as the population shifts and gains in years to come. Some of these properties are jointly owned, if you will, that is to say administered and have responsibility for them with counties as well as the state. And there may be other lands that are privately held right now, or perhaps held by other departments that might be suitable for a school to be created in the 21st century. The point is that I'm involved in discussions with various entities and departments and sectors to see whether agreements could be reached if we have the opportunity through the legislative support for 21st century schools to be able to deal with any administrative or legal requirements to work compatibly and cooperatively in land that may be jointly administered by different governmental entities or even private interests if that is the appropriate venue to pursue to create a new school. In addition, when I had the opportunity to go to New York City in connection with our credit rating and the possibility and certainly the effort that we were making of getting the lowest possible interest rates based on our being able to convince the credit rating agencies that the state of Hawaii was on a fiscally sound path. I also had the opportunity then to speak about 21st century schools as a proposition for the state of Hawaii to funders and to investors in New York, and it was, I can honestly say to you, it was universally well received. They think we have an ideal combination in Hawaii, a single school system that covers the state, a single school board, one, by the way, that is appointed. And I'm mentioning that because that was not a big issue, but a well-taken point. That the politics, i.e. electoral politics, was not a question for members of the Board of Education, and that was deemed a positive. And the idea of the 21st century schools in utilizing public land for a public purpose, i.e. the advancement of facilities and programs, etc., for schools, was something that they thought made a good deal of sense in a world in which the amount of funds that may be available, both from the point of view of operating and from the point of view of capital improvement, it seemed to them a very, very sound approach, and that we had an excellent opportunity here in Hawaii. I want to conclude by saying that if we can put this concept into law, that is to say, give us the opportunity to put it forward. Obviously, I can't guarantee ahead of time that every school or every property would be eligible for this. That is to say, would be compatible with a partnership to develop the property and to establish 21st century schools in the process and meet all the public purposes. I can guarantee that that would be the result when you pick the projects. But obviously, with 250 plus properties, not every one is going to be suitable for that. But what we would be doing then is, I will give you an example. Just on Oahu, we've made some assessments. All you have to do is go to the tax office and so on, and go get the tax key map, see what the assessments are and so on. If you just go between Hawaii Kai and Farrington High School, you members, honestly, I think you'd be astounded at the potential, just the assessment, which is arbitrary. It's not capricious at all, but it is arbitrary because the idea of utilizing this land simply hasn't come forward in any conceptual way or any propositions to this point. But if you just take the assessments, it's well over $1 billion. Well over $1 billion just in that small area. So you can imagine what we do if we assess the whole state. I think we'd be in multiple billions of dollars in terms of its potential. And we have within that area schools that match the kind of well-known figure, I guess, that we have now, that the average of our schools throughout the state is over 65 years now. We have to make an investment in our young people, both programmatically, and we have to make an investment in our infrastructure if we're going to meet the demands of the 21st century. And so this gives us an opportunity to try and reach out then to various communities with the idea of coming to a consensus that different projects might find themselves very, very compatible with both the needs of the students, the needs of the staff at the schools, the needs of the parents, and meeting a public purpose we otherwise would not be able to achieve simply because we don't have the monetary resources to be able to do it. So I hope that you'll give this I know you'll give it your full consideration. I hope you'll move the bill forward so that we can indeed have 21st century schools that lead the nation in terms of being a progressive step in the education of all of our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. I know your time is valuable, so I'll ask members. Members, do you have any questions? Okay, I just want to say thank you.
Don't forget, Sir Thomas More said silence is assent.
Well, I personally, I wanted to ask. Oh, let me get it right. So I did have one question, because I know that it's been a concern of the public regarding Public Land Development Corporation, yes. But that is, you're confident that there is definitely public process, public input along the way.
When you read, otherwise. It won't, without going into that, this was on our radar well before this whole other issue manifested itself the way it has, or even as a proposition. It is entirely it stands alone on its merits, regardless of whatever else may come up, and it simply won't work otherwise. You're not going to get started. It can't take place. The mere fact that we've put this idea out there has already generated commentary where people are already thinking in the DOE itself, in neighborhoods, oh, well, this is an opportunity possibly for us. We've already had suggestions. I've already had, anecdotally, suggestions made to me. Could we do this? Could we do that? And but just take, for example, a property that otherwise might be closed. I don't think anybody wants that. And for whatever the set of reasons, philosophically, programmatically, within the DOE and the board's decision about closing a school, let's say, doesn't it make sense then to see whether or not you might be able to maintain a school there on a property and perhaps have assisted living, a partnership for assisted living or workforce housing, and combine it with a school, or put workforce housing, assisted living, and I'm not just trying to pick something that people can't argue with. Who's going to argue with assisted living? I'm not picking it just for that reason, but I'm saying that that's entirely compatible with where a lot of the schools are. Workforce housing, rentals are absolutely necessary, particularly in the urban core. That's one of the reasons why I picked, just for an initial assessment, from Hawaii Kai to Farrington High School. There may be real opportunities there to get housing for our people and at the same time upgrade schools in the area. We're thinking about complexes, of course. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. It won't work if people don't agree to it. It just won't. That's all. So I don't... my bottom line of my answer is that I'm hoping that we're not going to start thinking about let's see what kind of dangers can I foresee, and then focus on that, as opposed to how can we have a positive outcome here that that is entirely compatible with what is most likely to happen. You're simply not going to have any discussion about any school that isn't going to generate, or school area that isn't going to generate interest and a coordinated and a consensual approach to it is the only one that will work.
Okay, thank you. And
if we don't have the opportunity legislatively, it'll never happen.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Fale.
Thank you, Governor, for being here.
Thank you.
Silence may be assent in some cultures, but that's not true of all cultures. My question has to do with, was there just simply a disconnect between the public understanding what was going on, or was there a failure to adequately educate the public? Where did the miscommunication or the disconnect arise from, if there was any, or does the public understand clearly what this is all about?
I'm sorry, Representative, I don't know what you're asking me.
Well, regarding the bill,
what disconnect?
Disconnect. There is a significant number of people within my community that are very dissatisfied with the bill.
The 21st century school bill?
We're on the 21st century.
Yes. Because they don't understand clearly exactly what's involved, and a lot of this has to do with a lot of the teachers that I'm talking to. Is there
well, okay, I'll be happy to answer. What's the question?
Well, how exactly, they don't see clearly how implementation is going to be taking place, what their role exactly is going to be in regards to this bill. They don't see clearly how they plug in.
Well, okay. Can I, if you'll give me a minute, I'll try to answer you. I still don't exactly understand what you're talking about, but under the bill, the Department of Education, the Board of Education, and the Hawaii Community Development Authority, the HCDA, as the catalyst for it, would collaborate to complement, supplement, or where appropriate, be able to substitute for general fund appropriations to bring public schools into the 21st century. I'm not quite, well, I'd like to meet with who you're talking about, because every school teacher that I've talked to and principal is looking forward to the idea that this might come to fruition. The public school lands, especially those which could be considered underutilized or having the possibility for utilization, are looked at, if this legislation passes, as an untapped resource. We have to have the funds to be able to bring our schools into the 21st century. Public-private partnerships then would provide the opportunity to use these available lands for public education, the advancement of public education, both its support in terms of programs, operating funds, and capital improvements. So you'd lease the underutilized lands to generate income, to upgrade existing schools or construct new schools to meet 21st century standards and opportunities. Perhaps some of the schools in your area don't meet those standards, or would like to meet higher standards than they can right now. And our duties as legislators and public officials is to facilitate that throughout the state. So if we have public-private partnerships and they refocus the uses of these properties, as I suggested, workforce housing, et cetera, if we refocus the use, they will support, I believe, community-driven redevelopment and help communities to make better use of the land while advancing educational opportunities and economic opportunities that benefit both the tax-paying public and the students and parents.
Governor, we would love to take you up on that offer. Would you like to come down to our area and have this discussion in our community?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Yes. Representative Morikawa.
Thank you. Good morning, Governor.
Good morning.
All the way from Kauai.
Yes.
Because I'm from a neighbor island, can you explain the county's role in this?
Yes.
I see you have a county designee.
Yes. I missed the last part of what you said.
There's a section that says something about county designee on.
Yeah.
Can you explain more about that,
Yes.
please?
Virtually every property has its own individual dynamics in terms of the legal authority, or I should the kuleana, the responsibility for those properties. Sometimes it's the state, sometimes it's the county, sometimes the state and counties together, sometimes it's other entities. That's what it's about. That what you'd have to do, not have to do, what would be your opportunity right away is to work with the county or any other entity that has the responsibility for the land to see whether or not a compatible use could be arrived at. That's all it is. It's literally a liaison and a legal admonition to reach out and do that. Otherwise, it can't even get started.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Thank you. Representative Hanohano.
Aloha kakayaka kia aina. My question is, I think sometimes we need to go back to the history of our educational system, because I believe that during the territorial days, the schools were run by counties. Because like in my area in Puna, we had schools in Pahoa, Kapoho, Opikau, and Kalapana.
That's right.
Okay? So
the schools weren't necessarily schools weren't necessarily run by the counties, but the counties clearly had the legal jurisdiction and responsibility.
Counties had the legal jurisdiction. So from the county, then I believe in 1959 to in the 60s, then they converted these schools county jurisdiction to state jurisdiction.
That's right.
And I believe till today, some of these county jurisdictions were never turned over to the state. So we do have, I would say, like lands in limbo.
I wouldn't call it.
Because the jurisdiction is not clear.
You're right. You're essentially right.
Because
for these purposes of the bill, limbo is the right word.
Yes, because in my area, and it's still happening today in Pahoa, because the schools were started in the territorial days, but the school was a Japanese school before it became a public school. So, you see what I'm getting at? And so when the schools went to the county and was turned over to the state, the ballpark and the gym was never given to the state, because this was a community ballpark for the community.
Yeah.
So, we still have this ongoing remnants of lands in limbo. So, for me, how do we clear it up to be congruent with what you want to do in the 21st century? When I first started coming here as a legislature, I thought I was still in 1959. I was just shocked at the things that were supposed to have been done for the people of the state of Hawaii and hasn't been done. So I'm like, what am I doing here?
Well, you're gonna correct that.
I will correct that, and that is what I am doing.
Yes.
Yes.
And I agree with you entirely on it. What the not so much the answer, but my observation or my comment on your observation is you're right. What happened was it wasn't a plot or a scheme or anything. The assumption was, well, when the state came into existence from the territory and they took over the responsibility, that they would do so, that the legislature would fund things and take care of it, and in some instances, you're right. They just never formally got around to actually taking the legal steps necessary, writing the papers, signing off, and so on to actually formally cede the lands like the gym or the ball fields or something to the state. But for half a century, that didn't much matter because everything got funded and you went along as you were. The reason it's in the headlights today is because we're trying to consider, are there other arrangements that we could make that are innovative and collaborative and formulate a public-private partnership that will advance the capacity to build 21st century schools and to support the programs and the people in them. So it will be necessary then to correct that.
Yes.
And
I think one of the solutions really is to bring all the stakeholders together,
yes,
especially if we have this type of situation like in my own town.
Sure. And informally, that's what we're doing. Obviously, I wouldn't put the bill forward without inquiring of, once I became aware that of the situation you just outlined. Naturally, I just reached out, and the DOE reached out informally just to say, should we even bother to go ahead? Is this going to be a difficulty? And uniformly, the answer coming back is that no. On the contrary, this is something that I can't speak for the mayors or the councils on in all of the counties, but my informal, what do you call it? My focus group, if you will. Says no, they'd be very happy about it because, among other things, you might have property taxes coming into the picture that don't otherwise exist, and the counties, believe me, every one of them is looking for revenue, and so if new revenue can be generated and public schools advance at the same time, that's a happy combination.
Yes, and I would just like to make one last comment. I would like to thank you for recognizing the Ka'ukiao Pahua complex with the Race to the Top monies.
Yes.
And our complex is doing a very good job. Out of 9 schools, 7 have made AYP. So
yes.
I thank you for the monies and the investment you have done in my community.
Well, it's not me, believe me. It's the board and the department. And I'm facilitating that and pleased to do so. I just parenthetically, for those on the Big Island for the rest of the state, I was at Ke'au Elementary the other day to celebrate the Digital Learning Day. It's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I can tell you, I just fell in love with those kids there. And their teachers and the principal and the staff and the principals in the complex. Mary Correa's the driving wheel there. I'm telling you, you hear people making commentary about the public schools, members and chairs. You hear people making comments about the public schools, often derogatory comments. I don't know if they've ever actually spent any time in any classrooms. And I don't know if they've ever spent any time with these dedicated teachers and young people like at Ke'au. Those kids are poor.
Yes.
By some standards, monetary standards, statistical standards. They've got difficulties, many of them in their home lives, in terms of the stability in their family structures and so on. But let me tell you, the public school is the vehicle for these kids to be able to have a vision of their lives more than just chaos and oppression of their dreams or their abilities. And that's what this is all about in the end. How can we give our kids the maximum opportunity to exercise their abilities and capacities? It's our duty, it's our kuleana to see to it that these children have that opportunity. And so the impetus behind this proposition is, can we do this in a way that will enable those young people to maximize those possibilities? I couldn't be more proud of what the teachers and the parents and the students are doing in that particular area against all the odds. And we need to be able to help them. Because the bottom line on that is that if this succeeds, or when this succeeds, the funds will go back into education. This is not something to try and make money to put in the general fund. It's to go back into education so that even if that particular area doesn't have a public-private development, it will be the beneficiary of the funds coming in.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Representative Ward. Oh, shoot.
Silence by no microphone, Governor.
I beg your pardon?
We've been silent down here because we didn't have a microphone.
That's never inhibited you in the past, Representative Ward.
Yeah, it won't now, thank you very much. But thank you for being here. It's Saturday morning, you know, sometimes governors like to take a little bit of time off. Appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
You mentioned from Hawaii Kai to Farrington, $1 billion, just the potential sitting there.
That's the assessed valuation.
The assessed value. But it seems to be that you're suggesting there's a correlation between the amount of money spent and the quality of education, or that there's a correlation that we can bump student achievement with more funds, suggesting that, and this is the reality, it's not other than the objective measurement of some national institutions and governments that we're still 43rd in the nation, Governor. 43rd. Some have even said 47. Don't you think there's a higher priority for a teacher's contract than this development, or are you willing to earmark the money for this to get a teacher's contract? That's the question.
Well, I don't think that that's the subject of this bill.
But you're suggesting there's a correlation that we're going to bump up education out of 43rd in the nation by having more money brought through school facilities, bringing in workforce housing or whatever other suggestions to generate income.
Well, an income would go back into the schools. Surely you're not suggesting that I have a contest between a teacher's contract and the well-being of our children.
There's a lot of anxiety and frustration in the teachers. And I know how much you expressed your love for them, but they're waiting for a contract with very serious anticipation.
Representative Ward, if you'd like to have a discussion about the collective bargaining in this state and how it's proceeding, I'd be happy to do that. But in all honesty, I don't think that's appropriate to what we're talking about.
Yeah,
we are in an
Representative Ward,
education hearing. If
Representative
teachers have
Ward.
nothing to do with education, I stand corrected.
Okay, members, any questions? Yes, please. Representative Jordon.
Oh, yes, Joe, thank you.
There's the...
Was there any consideration of discussion of developing this for the public trust lands, the 20% revenues? Seeing we are going to be public school lands, and these revenues from this particular measure will be deposited into the public school lands for school facilities. And my research in the last 2 years, noting the university sitting on some of those public trust lands,
Yes.
they pay their 20%. So I would, because they're one of the 5 purposes.
Yes.
So the thought process that this is one of the, if this is one of the 5 purposes, are we going to take that same stance, seeing this could generate a lot of funds?
I think this is one of the things that needs to be addressed by the legislature and a conclusion reached. If we're able to move forward with turning the concept into legislation, then this is one of the issues that you'll have to resolve or deal with and come to a conclusion. Whatever you decide in that, in terms of distribution of income and where it should reside, obviously is what we would do. I didn't want to preclude. My idea is to get whether we can see whether we want to proceed with this concept in law, and then how it's distributed and so on. That has to be the object of a discussion. So I'm entirely open on all of that. I have no preconceptions or preconclusions about it.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Members?
Chair.
Oh, Representative Onishi.
Governor, thank you very much for coming this morning. We really do appreciate you spending the time with us. I have a question in regards to in the bill, it talks about coming up with plans. And as you know, on the Big Island, the County Council and the island of Hawaii has gone through a lot of work in the development of not only our general plan for the island, but also community development plans.
Yes.
And my question is, I don't see in here where that is going to be taken into account in terms of what the constituents, especially in my district, have already developed in terms of the development of their community, and how this is going to fit and take into account those plans for development. So can you express how that would happen?
Maybe I didn't make it clear enough before, and I'll try to correct that. It may be that there isn't a compatibility. It may be that whatever the development and approach of the very dynamic communities on the Big Island, the Big Island is probably the fastest changing island of any right now in terms of communities all over, literally altering not only their landscape but demographically, economically, socially. Tremendous changes taking place on the Big Island, and a real task for a formidable task for the county council to come to grips with all of the implications of that. So it may well be that in any given community, this proposal and this approach to the schools might not simply be useful. So it depends strictly on whether or not the proposals come forward that meet that the community concludes meets their needs and is compatible with existing requirements. Whether it's general plans or codes or whatever else might come into the picture. Sufficient water, transportation access, physical infrastructure, those kinds of things. It can't proceed forward unless it meets the capacity of a particular area to support any particular project that might be under consideration. So I don't see any contradiction or difficulty other than whether or not it can meet all the things that you just mentioned, meet the requirements of existing general plan or whatever the various designations at the county level might be.
I guess my concern is that, as you said, it doesn't say in this document that they would have to do that they would have to take into account and incorporate any kind of county general plan or community development plan. But my other concern, I guess...
Well, I don't think that, I'll have to defer. If it doesn't, then we didn't, then it's not written right. But that's not my understanding from the Attorney General. But I'll point taken, and I will have them respond to you to see whether or not that's adequately covered and to your satisfaction.
Okay, and I guess from the county standpoint, in terms of the development of any kind of school or building or housing, etc., are they also going to be incorporated in there the requirement to follow building codes and inspections and etc. that the county has in place?
Yeah, because otherwise, among other things, otherwise you'd be liable. Yeah, there's no sense in doing it unless you're going to do it correctly. I can't imagine. There's no reason not to that I can think of to do otherwise.
Thank you very much, Governor. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, members. Representative Ing.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Governor Abercrombie, for being able to come out and testify. And thank you, everyone in attendance as well, for your civil engagement. Just a real quick question.
Sure.
A couple years ago, there was a study by HIPAA about this 21st Century Schools initiative. And it was noted that we reviewed other public school land trust models, particularly on the West Coast, or Arizona and Washington and Oregon, and
in New York City.
And New York, yeah. I was wondering if you could provide any updates on any numbers or any benefits of their stakeholders, or if there's any other state that is this sort of initiative.
I can do that, but I think you've already cited some of the existing examples. I can say this: I spoke to the folks at the Ford Foundation, and my understanding is the Ford Foundation has granted a considerable sum of money. I'm reluctant to say what the number is. Well, anyway, that's the kind of thing that's being undertaken right now. To citing previous areas that are compatible, maybe not exactly the same thing that we're talking about, because as I say, each area, each region, each city has its own particular dynamics, its own particular rules and regulations.
Sure. Or especially unique area.
County plans, like Representative Onishi said, there's all kinds of different city councils, different school districts. Nobody else has a statewide school district, for example. Some are supported by property taxes and not general funds, the way they are in Hawaii, that kind of thing. But all that taken into account, I'll be happy to provide the committee, to the degree we have not yet, material on how this concept is working in other areas.
Great. Yeah, I've a lot of I've been provided with a lot of I guess materials on what a 21st century school would look like, perhaps in Hawaii, but
yes.
Not so much about exactly how fluid the transition went in other states and the long-term, I guess, results a few years later. So this study I mentioned from HIPPO was a couple years back, so maybe an update would be beneficial, because we're really going to be changing the entire paradigm of the state.
Let me give a quick example. Maybe I didn't. I probably should have a little more when I spoke about Ke'au School. Every child. One of the reasons I was there was this is part of our proposal to give every child in the state a laptop, a tablet, to be able to bring them into 21st century technological capacity, utilize their abilities with IT. And every child has one in the school. There's between 800 and 850 kids, and they all have now their tablets. They started handing them out in October. Not one has been lost. Not one. I guarantee you, among the members here, you can't say that you haven't lost your car keys since October, right? Something you can't find. Your glasses, your watch. The kids, they've not lost one, because the kids take full ownership of this. This is theirs. This is a part of their life they can have some control over. So what would happen with a 21st century school, regardless of whether it's in Los Angeles or New York or wherever, in the particular circumstances, one of the requirements, if there was a partnership, would be that the developing, the partner, the private partner, would have to build a school that was equipped such that all the students could have the latest in technological capacity, regardless of where they were. That kind of thing is what we would make ubiquitous to whatever the particular development is.
I came from traditional DOE public schools, and in the 8th grade I got into Committe schools, Maui campus, where every student was provided with a laptop, and I can testify that that makes a world of difference, and really equips you for the kind of society we live in today.
Yes, if we don't do this, we not just risk, we are in the process right now of having a digital division in our young people. Absolutely. They will not be able to compete the same way. Every child. When I was in the 3rd grade class and the 5th grade class, for example, at Ke'au, every single child was working in every single room. Every single one. You can go by the doors, you look in the room. You've done this, Faye. You know what I'm talking about. Every single one was working. And the teachers were able to then take the kids who were having the most trouble, pull them back, work with them separately in the back room, because all the rest of the children were working on their problems individually, moving at their best pace, and so on. When I came in, what are you working on? Parameters. Yeah, everybody's freezing right now. Is he going to ask us about parameters, right? You know, believe me, I froze. Parameters. And, you know, I'm not going to go through the whole thing about how they work it on, but they're entirely used to it. They've got their calculators, they have their laptops, they're engaged. It makes all the difference in the world. Those kids are in charge. They right away, they have immediate feedback as to whether they're getting the correct answers. If they don't, they get the hints then. Here's what you missed, here's why you missed it. It's fabulous. And that's the kind of thing we have to have. And right now, we don't have the money. We don't have the capacity. We don't have the ability to provide those basics. So this idea is try to maximize the opportunity for our children statewide to be able to have the absolute best possibilities of the 21st century available to them.
Sure. One last comment. I want to thank you for your perspective. You know, I grew up in a globalized world where I see legislation lots of times we try to reinvent models that have already been successful, and it's really a waste of time. So, you know, in such a globalized society, we can just take existing models and tweak it to better fit our region and our culture. And I see you doing that with this initiative, and that's why I'm asking if we can get updates on what has been successful.
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Just take the libraries, for example. Those young people at Ke'au right now, even though we have to have simultaneous transmission, televised transmission, because I met with all of the principals, even though some of the principals were 55 miles away. Because Mary she's got a garage. She took her garage, they fixed the garage, Stillman? Shipman, yeah. Don Walker, I think, from the Shipman folks were there. They fixed the garage up so that's the conference room for the complex. And the complex gets together without having to meet in person, because they couldn't do it. It'd take an hour and a half just to get one way to meet. They all meet, they talk. Those kids, every one of them, they have a library to the world. They can bring in the Library of Congress because they've got the IT. So the 21st century idea is to get labs, to get wired up. We right now go to the schools. They're ready. But in some instances, they don't have the electrical capacity to be able to utilize the IT that we can make available right now. So all I'm saying is here, look, this is an opportunity for us to put the private sector and the public sector together for a public purpose, the single most important public purpose there is, which is to see that the children of this state have the best opportunity to be everything they can be.
Thank you, Governor. Also, I wanted to thank you for including Kia High School in your budget. That we have there's been a dire need for decades now. There's over 1,000 high school age students in my district that have to travel 30 miles to the closest school, Maui High and Baldwin, both which are way over capacity. So I think it's about time. And thank you. By travel, and
I should have emphasized that, Madam Chair. To the degree I haven't emphasized it enough. We're not cutting the neighbor islands out of this at all. As a matter of fact, I'm looking forward to proposals coming from the neighbor island schools, the neighbor islands, where they deem possible partnerships valuable and feasible. And Maui is a clear example right now. If you go to I'm not going to do your legislating for you, obviously, but you cannot go to South Maui without understanding that this, just like the Big Island, this is one of the areas that dynamic growth, and we need to get ahead of that curve. And we have an opportunity to put something together there. I think that would just create an educational context that would be second to none. And lots of opportunities are there on every island.
Mahalo, Governor. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to cross this generational divide with you, Representative Ing.
Okay, Representative.
Morning, Governor.
Oh, good morning.
Under this bill, it looks like you're proposing to expand the HCDA by several members under the board to vote on which schools will be redeveloped. It stipulates that there will be representatives from the DOE, it says a Hawaiian cultural member, as well as other at-large members. Can you tell me, noting that in the rationale you say you'd like to have parents, teachers, schools involved, Can you tell me how those board members will be selected and what qualifications they'll have?
I think if you, when you get to further testimony, there'll be amendments proposed, I think, that will answer that question, or those questions, or the implications. I think that will resolve that. I think that it just, there's an iron rule in politics, right? When you're explaining, you're losing. And it has to be immediately grasped. Just what you've outlined creates such a set of difficulties that I think these amendments will clear that up.
Further testimony from whom?
From HCDA, from the Department of Education, and so on.
I'll look for it. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Rather than me go through it, I think your questions will be answered.
Okay. Representative Ono, any more? No more? Yeah, Representative Woodson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Governor, for your time. Obviously, in my humble opinion, this has the potential of being very good for our school system. Mm-hmm. In my humble opinion, anytime that you can aggregate more funds for the children, that's a good thing, however we decide to use the funds. My question is that your initial assessment with regards to your focus group is $1 billion for the areas described. Mm-hmm. Do you have any estimates as to what it would be if all went well and the plan was implemented on a statewide level?
An educated guess. Just picking assessments out on the different islands and so on, I think it's probably in excess of $4 billion, what the assessments are. No, maybe that's misleading just even saying it. I mean, this is about the only way we can go at it right now. What are these lands worth? So, as I said, those designations are arbitrary, but they're not capricious. They're fairly internally consistent among assessors in each of the counties. So, if you take some lands, particularly in the urban core of Oahu, where there's very high density, it's not difficult to see that these lands would be worth a considerable amount of money if they were to be sold, if they were otherwise available for private development. So that is simply a benchmark against which then in discussions about proposals for any of these lands as to what the return might be, or whether it would be worth it to a developer to be required to build a new school or to equip a new school, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, members. Any more questions? Thank you very much for the good discussion. We appreciate you coming.
To you.
Thank you. Okay. For the audience and members, this discussion was on House Bill 865 relating to public school redevelopment. The description of the bill establishes framework for the development of 21st century schools through the redevelopment of public school lands by the Hawaii Community Development Authority. We received approximately 30 testifiers. We got 26 written testimony based on the hearing notice that we put out. And anybody that's listening that would like to provide comments on that, I encourage you to go online to www.capital.hawaii.gov and look up the hearing notice and do weigh in on this if you would like to, even after this hearing today. But having said that, with only about approximately 30 testifiers, I would like to read quickly the names of those who sent in testimony by 5 o'clock last night. And if you're in the audience, please let me know. B.A. McClintock, Troy Abraham, Teresa Nakama, Martha Martin, Marilyn Mick, Honoloa Helela, Donna Stokes, Dick Meyer, Daniel Kanahele, Daniel Bishop, Carolyn Knoll, Billy Dawson, Suzanne Wakalan, Paul Kaikendall, Wyndon Shonenham, Control Point Survey and Inc., Ed Ye. Sorry about that noise, feedback. Hawaii Advocates for Consumer Rights, Scott Foster. Yes. Would you like to speak to us? Okay. We're also asking if you could please limit your testimony to 2 minutes.
Goodness. Tough act to follow. Aloha, honorable chairs, co-chairs, and committee members. My name is Scott Foster. I am the Communications Director of Hawaii Advocates for Consumer Rights. Our 19-year-old statewide organization was co-founded by Mr. Ralph Nader, and we continue to monitor, research, and testify on any legislation such as House Bill 865 that we feel would not advance the common good. At this point, I'm going to stand on the written testimony, but I do have some comments to make after hearing the governor and this very interesting dialogue on HB 865. Of the 7 bills before you today, HB 865 generated the most conversation among my constituents and other organization leaders that I discussed it with. Personally, and for many of us, this concept has been talked about for many years, the use of public school lands, how monies might be leveraged to support education, build communities with all of the very valid reasons I've heard, community centers, senior living, et cetera, et cetera. I personally think that this is a great concept. I would quote Governor Ben Cayetano at this point. He once said, after being asked, "Oh, Governor, what is your vision for the state?" he muttered aside, and I happened to be accompanying him that day, "Jiminy, everybody wants to talk about building the beautiful house on the hill, but nobody wants to talk about putting in the sewers and the electric." I suggest that this bill is the beginning of putting in the infrastructure for what could become a beautiful house or community on the hill. With that said, the historic dysfunction of the HCDA and the DOE, the perception of corruption during this current feeding frenzy of development, with this bill dropped into the witch's brew of the great public controversy about the PLDC, Act 50, and the dirty dozen bills, so-called legislation that were defeated last year that would have plugged in the PLDC. It's unfortunate that this bill has appeared in the midst of all that. In conclusion, I would suggest that you carefully weigh this, but deal with the PLDC issue, get that settled. Otherwise, I do not believe you're going to get the public support you need to pass what otherwise might be a very valuable piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Next, Kahea, the Hawaiian Environmental Alliance, John Osorio. Here. Faith Action for Community Equity, Karen Canoza. Okay. Hawaii State Public Library System. Yes, do you wish to stand on your testimony? Thank you. Land Use Research Foundation of Hawaii. Okay. The Pacific Resource Partnership.
Good morning, chairs, co-chairs, and members of the committees. My name is Cindy McMillan, representing the Pacific Resource Partnership, a labor management consortium of general contractors and the Hawaii Regional Council of Carpenters. We strongly support 21st century schools. We have long known that the proper physical environment fosters learning for our kids. And it's not just wired classrooms and the appropriate technology, although those matter. It's also open space, spaces to explore and learn. And it's creating community resources that we could do with this bill. We know that many of our schools are aging. We know we have difficulties. This bill creates the mechanism whereby we could fund the needed improvements for our kids. If we focus on the outcome for our kids, What we'll see is 21st Century Schools provides that way for us to help them learn better so that they can go to work, they can go to college, and they are ultimately able to compete in a global marketplace and be lifelong learners. We have to start somewhere. We do recognize that this bill may require some amendments. Some have already been mentioned today. But we are strong supporters, and we do believe that public input into this process is vital, not only by parents, by business leaders, by teachers, by principals, by all those involved. Mahalo for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. McMillan. Hawaii Community Development Authority. Okay.
Chair Evans, members, Anthony Ching, Executive Director of HCDA. 2 minutes. Okay. Let me just say then that I'm going to try to augment, or I'm able to augment if you prefer, my testimony that might answer some of the issues that were raised. Let me start off by saying there's an old axiom, never volunteer. I was persuaded by the governor's passion and the fact that my own role as a parent of 5 kids who have matriculated through public schools and then fortunately enough through Kamehameha, as well as myself. So I believe that though my agency has the capacity and the operational fabric to ensure accountability, and that we would do one part, and that part is to wield zoning powers and community development planning skills, as well as asset management, to produce results to modernize public school facilities. I would defer to the legislature, the DOE, and the state library system, as they're mentioned in the bill, with respect to all those matters relating to selection of site and priorities, and telling us what a 21st century public school facility looks like, as well as the programs that are attendant and necessary. With respect to public accountability, and it was mentioned often, as an agency that is obliged to build community in place, we're obliged to build plans that are sensitive to the community. Therefore, we would be obliged to incorporate and integrate all community priorities as well as educational priorities in achieving that item. And I see my time is up.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sure there's questions, but we'll wait till all the testifiers. Okay. Next, Department of Education.
Good morning, chairs, vice chairs, representatives. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Ray LaRue, and I am the Assistant Superintendent of Schools for Schools Facilities and Support Services. And I stand here on behalf of the department in support of this bill. I'll stand on that testimony with comment. Again, the dialogue this morning, I'll try to be quick to stay within time, but just to paint the landscape of the state of our schools in Hawaii. And I stand here also as a father of 2 children that made it and matriculated through this public school system. And from an altruistic standpoint, I love coming to work every day, and I'm doing this because how do you make school better? Of the 256 campuses that we maintain and redevelop and develop in this state, they are an average of 65 years old. And with the capital improvement money that we get annually, somewhere in the neighborhood of $210 million, is not enough to rebuild our schools in a 21st century nature. Hawaii remains 51st in the nation with regards to capital improvement dollars per pupil going back into its infrastructure. If we do nothing different than what we're doing today, we decay. And that needs to resonate as you look at this bill. I'm not going to get into the governance, but I can tell you, when you look at a 21st century facility and what that means in terms of a 21st century education, everybody might have a different definition for that. But if you look at a nexus concept of what a 21st century school would look like in, say, an urban setting, where you have community engagement, community involvement, You have a multi-purpose use facility where in the daytime that becomes school, that transitions into after school, that transitions into community. We used to build communities in any urban planning model around schools, and I think we should do that again. But again, this measure is about school, and that has to be the resonating factor as we examine this. And I look like I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have questions at the end. Chamber of Commerce. Okay. Then we have people here today that signed up to testify. Margaret Willey.
Margaret Willey, resident of the Big Island. I'm also the County Council member for District 9, South Kohala, North Kohala, County of Hawaii. And South Kohala is really the only district in which we don't have a public high school. And education is obviously a key and most important principle and important goal for me. At the same time, I do have a problem with this legislation. I believe we're looking at two questions as if they were one. The first question is, how can we make our schools the best possible? And the second is, how do we fund them? I don't see that as the same question. I think Representative Hanohano brought up about the whole idea of state versus local control. Here we're talking about going from state control to essentially private and potentially commercial control. I don't agree with that. I also want to, we have partnerships, but it shouldn't be the private entity that's in control, and often in control in a sense where there's no right to judicial review. I'm an attorney for 30 years, mostly in land use, public interest, and I see in many avenues the public is being, and their input is being made meaningless. Here where state decisions are made on a state level or by private entities, and disregarding the county councils, the community development plans, and removing public input from the process. So I also think, in answer to one of the questions, why is this being so much concern, it's just the sense of where you say development corporation. We don't trust you after the Public Lands Development Corporation, and we need to look at these things holistically and have adult conversations, and not one that combine questions in a way that it looks like we're opposed to education if we're opposed to a certain privatization process. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Margaret Willey. Kathy Bryant.
Good morning. Thank you very much for letting me speak, and thank you for having this on a Saturday morning. It's very convenient. I'm here on behalf of the Hui for Excellence in Education Coalition. We did submit testimony, and I'll stand on the testimony and support. We're a group of over 40 parent and community organizations focused on increasing family and community engagement in our schools. So with that in mind, I'd like to respectfully ask you to move the bill along, but consider some of the amendments that we presented to you, specifically to, in the bill state that community engagement must be a component of any school redesign activity. We've heard that spoke about quite a bit, but we haven't seen it directly in the bill. We'd also ask that any underutilized school lands that are considered, that county zoning and county rules do be applicable, and that zoning be compatible with any surrounding use. So we want to make sure that the community is both engaged and the uses are appropriate for any of the school lands utilized. And finally, we'd like to recommend that in the 4 at-large members, consideration be given to parent and education experts, that they would be a valuable addition to that decision-making process, and that they be involved from the beginning. We also like what HCDA said, that it should be the role of the community, the schools, the department, and the board in deciding the plan for what schools are going to be considered and how they're going to be redesigned and what the design will look like, and that the HCDA just be an implementing entity. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Charles Ota. Charles Ota, do you wish to come up to testify? No? Okay. Michelle Matson. And after Michelle, we'll have Keiko Bonk.
Good afternoon, Chair Evans and representatives. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify on all these bills today. It's long overdue and very welcome by the public. In addressing House Bill 865, redevelopment of public school lands, this portends exploitation of public school lands to benefit private interests. It provides for the taking of school campuses for redevelopment into workforce housing complexes, commercial and industrial uses, under the guise of community development needs. To propose the taking of public school campuses, their playgrounds, and their ball fields is the antithesis of serving community needs. Our keiki should not be boxed into cubicles in mixed-use high-rises to receive their education, or be deprived of playgrounds and ball fields essential to their health and welfare. This proposal, targeting our 254-plus school campuses as underutilized and untapped resources, has not been thought out in the greater public interest. It is clearly the brainchild of the public land development cult, developer-driven and intent on privatizing our public lands for private profit. Public lands have been protected by established policies and principles for sound reason in the greater public interest. Public lands are protected in the public trust for present and future generations, not for private exploitation and instant gratification. This is why they have been perpetuated as public lands. House Bill 865 refers to community-driven redevelopment of our public school campuses, yet there is no mention of community-based planning. This measure simply refers to public-private partnerships using these public lands differently and subsequently allowing the state to use available lands. Are these available lands intended to be leftover remnants following redevelopment of our school campuses into workforce housing, commercial and industrial uses? This proposed legislation speaks of compatible land use within the surrounding community. Is such compatibility envisioned as 650-foot towers covering 3.5 acres in Wahiawa, encasing some classrooms on the 40th floor? Will the interested and affected community have a say in this type of developer-driven forceful planning that will change their community forever? Further embedded in this measure is a claim that the Hawaii Community Development Authority has a proven track record in engaging public-private partnerships. Yet no community-based planning has been brought to fruition by the HCDA. It is HCDA-based planning, a developer-driven predecessor to the PLDC. I speak from experience. For example, upon partial completion of what was represented as a community-based master plan for Kaka'ako Makai, a plan the community had vetted that prioritized the recreational needs of an expected population increase of 30,000 people in Kaka'ako alone. A planned community gathering place with necessary recreational open space per capita and engaging public facilities. The community was then told that this plan would remain merely a concept subject to foreclosure. Clearly, the state private developer-driven HCDA is not the entity to take on public school campuses in the public interest. This is best left to the Department of Education, which can be more easily remedied. House Bill 865 should be stripped of any and all sections related to 206E, the HCDA, and 171C, the PLDC. This excessive layering of agencies and funding is dysfunctional, costly, and not within the public interest. In conclusion, community-based planning and input is paramount, and compatibility with the existing community is essential. Please hold this bill. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Keiko Bonk? Keiko Bonk? I know she's sitting.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on these bills. As you know, I am opposed to the PLDC concept in any way. I think we should repeal Act 55 immediately. And I'm here today to say that it's getting difficult for the public to follow all these other ideas that seem to be similar to the PLDC coming out all at once at the legislature this year. This school bill for the 21st century school project that is being proposed reads more like a 19th century feudal land use type development plot to me. It's more of the same style of politics and land use grabs that we've been used to in Hawaii in our old plantation days. Let's let the private sector figure out how to do things because they know better than the public sector. That's just not true. The public sector knows how to do things without the help of the private sector. That's why they're separate. And we need to keep in mind that it's important for the people of Hawaii to have separate entities helping to plan for their future. Merging too much private activity into the public good will only lead eventually to the private sector taking over. I'm sorry to say that we were not set up this way for a purpose, and that is for you. I know all of you. You're the representatives that look out for the public good. And if you start to commingle these agendas, we have a dangerous, dangerous formula that I might remind you brought most of the infrastructure problems and the lack of money for education in the first place. Public lands are not to be sold. This is something my father taught me many, many years ago. Public lands are not to be sold in Hawaii especially because Hawaii's land is worth more than most of the land around the world. It is our biggest asset for the future of many, many generations to come. It is a short-sighted solution to consider selling off our lands. I know personally because I grew up with my two educator parents, one in the DOE and one in the university system. I know personally that from when I was a little girl, people in the private sector were always trying to get the lands neighboring the University of Hawaii at Hilo and public school lands in Waikea that also neighbored the community I grew up in. I grew up on neighboring Lanikaula Street, right next to UH Hilo. And I know the lands that are designated for the expansion of Waikea schools and for the University of Hawaii. My little town is so small. You knew when the representative, Harvey Tajiri, was going to go and lobby to get his personal friends some public lands to do some private construction of theaters and McDonald's near the university. And they wanted also the public not just to give them these lands for their private interests, but also to start giving them infrastructure development so they don't have to spend any investment money. People fought that constantly It's not the directive, it was not the directive to have public lands be used for private enterprise. So everyone fought that for many, many generations already. And that's without any kind of means that you're proposing today to fast track that kind of opportunity for the private sector. And that's small time. That's just a little Hilo town scenario where you have people not just in the private sector but also in government trying to push for their own friends in their little towns.
Keiko, thank you for the example. Can you summarize for us?
Okay, I have another more personal example too. Right near my house in Kaimuki, Liliuokalani School just closed down. I don't know why it closed down. Most people I talk to in my community don't know why it closed down because it seemed to be a school that was active. Every morning I went by there and there were a lot of kids in that school, a lot of teachers. But now you have this prime property in Kaimuki, 2 blocks from where I live, being absorbed into the Kaimuki Christian School for parking and for other activities. It's not that I have a problem with Kaimuki Christian School. There's some really nice people there. However, that's a private institution versus across the street, a public institution. People are asking me in the neighborhood, why do they get to use it versus, say, the Kaimuki Community Association or the other neighborhood associations that have been formed there? Why do they get to use it? Already, without any kind of establishment of this proposal for a private government corporation, you have people trying to give favors to probably their friends. And, you know, I already know that public lands for the Kaimuki school has been absorbed already. There was other county land that was being used by the Board of Water Supply, and that land now is parking lots for the Kaimuki Christian School. Like I said, I'm not getting down on Kaimuki Christian School, but you already have processes for absorbing private public lands into private use. Now,
so, Keiko, can you summarize for us?
Okay.
So we can move on. We've got a long agenda. Thank you.
These are dangerous it's a dangerous thing you're trying to do here. And like the PLDC, which the public has spoken, we do not need it. There are other ways to establish relationships with private entities. This school proposal is the most egregious proposal I've seen in a long time. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Keiko. Next testifier, Juanita Kawamoto, followed by Jocelyn Doan.
Aloha mai kako, chairs, vice chairs, and members of the House committees. My name is Juanita Kawamoto Brown, and I am here today as a Native Hawaiian citizen advocate who also participates in many community organizations. I am here to say I oppose House Bill 865, and I'd like to further with a quote from the governor: "It won't work if the people won't agree to it. Therefore, can we gather the people, spend the time to educate them on the issue, and let's not rush in so quickly ahead before we have the time to have input from all our people." Creative generic solutions are not always the best way to find our answers, where communities and neighborhoods differ so dramatically. Administration is all that is needed, meaning, again, can we sit down with our communities and look at ways to work with each other? Why do we need the HCDA to create developments at the whims of a board that can sometimes be driven to pro-development or urbanization in non-urban communities? The economic impacts may weigh heavily on those rural areas that are not accustomed to this kind of development. For example, intergenerational development can be very costly and can weigh again heavily on a community and make us comply to things that don't fit the demographics of our area. Infrastructure and land use master plans will have to be rezoned, reassessed, readdressed. And these people, again, have to be able to come forward and look at the impacts for their neighborhoods. This is why I oppose this bill, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify. Mahalo.
Thank you, Anita. Jocelyn Doan? Oh, great. Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to testify? Yes, please, come up.
Chair Evans, members of the Joint Committee, my name is Harvey Youngquist. I live in Kalihi Valley. I'm a three-time candidate for Board of Education, and incidentally, I was at one time an OHA candidate, since I'm following a Native Hawaiian speaker. I have no written testimony previously submitted. I would like to make a comment. Since it is a three-committee joint hearing, you may be approving funding. I urge you to make that funding minimal because there are so many competing interests, not just on your agenda, but collective bargaining budget, the state budget. There was a bill that was already heard and referred to another committee concerning the Iolani Palace parking takeaway. So just please proceed with caution. Also on the Hawaii Community Development Authority, I think you need to add DAGs and BOE into the mix. Just 2 years ago, you changed the manner in which the board members are selected. It's now by appointment. And one thing they have done, which is in the negative category, is the school bus situation. That's something that they need to address. Perhaps more urgently in need of your funding than this particular House Bill 865. Even though my comments are comments, neither for or against, I felt compelled to say something about this. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Two people signed up. I just was brought up to want to speak. Mr. Chun? I'm sorry, it looks like James Chun to me. I apologize.
No problem at all. Good morning.
Good morning.
I oppose this bill for many good reasons. I'm a mom of public school children, and I have been through the system. There is too much to say in 2 minutes, but I'm just going to be highlighting a few points. We're very concerned that this has become a fad because it seems like we all know that Hawaii land is very valuable. I'm a real estate broker. We all know that. But in our opinion, public land should never be thrown into the mix to private developers because there is too many unknown for us to be playing with public land. We have heard in the news about the Aloha Tower. Those of us who have been here before, at the onstart, it was such a wonderful thing. Everything was projected to be a wonderful thing, and it was going to be a wonderful project, and wonderful dividends, and wonderful everything, and look at it today. What was said, what was so wonderfully projected, and what was so wonderfully presented to the public did not pan out. The businesses are not doing too well. It is now going to be a school dorm. We hear about school lunches fiasco. We hear about school transportation fiasco. In fact, we have a friend who works at the public school place, and she said that one day a tree fell by the wind and they wanted to go and help cut it. It would have cost the school nothing, but they were not allowed to do that for obvious red tape reason.
And we hear about Wonder Blunder. We hear about a lot of things. And in our opinion, if government were to exercise fiscal discipline and exercise better management, that we would actually find more money to be able to manage our public services. And I have a lot of problem when people talk about, yes, we're going to have 21st century school, and we are going to be able to have open space. That defies logic. How are we going to say that we are going to protect public space when we are stealing playing fields from our school children? And are we that bipolar that we're saying that, yes, we are going to be taking playgrounds from our kids, and yet we want them to go outside and play, and we complain about obesity problems, and we talk about mental problems. Children are human beings. They need the open field. They need open fields to roam around. Please, this is not a good idea to want to steal that open space for them. And again, this cannot be the only option. To me, this is a fad. This is a developer's dream. This is developers driven, as some of the testifiers have said. Let's get back to basics. Let's go back to sound management. Let's use some imagination. And instead of the powers to be meeting in small rooms with developer-minded people, open out to the public. The public does have very good ideas if you listen to them. And again, we feel that giving away public lands to private interests will only bring complication. We cannot guarantee the future of this public land if we want to include international investors or developers, because their role and their agenda is very different from the public good.
Thank you, Ms. June. Can you summarize for us for sake of time?
Thank you very much. So please get back to basics. Let's exercise fiscal discipline. And like the Nobel laureate said, Milton Friedman said that if you allow the feds to manage the Sahara Desert, it will run out of sand in 5 years.
Thank you. Stuart Coleman, followed by Kaini Nicholson. Stuart, are you here?
Hi, my name is Stuart Coleman with the Surfrider Foundation. I apologize for not sending in testimony earlier. My computer crashed yesterday, and so did I, as you can hear from my voice. But the Surfrider Foundation has voted that this is one of our top priorities this year, repeal of the PLDC, because we feel like this is not only an abuse of power, potentially, but it is also a failed model. As Michelle Madsen and others have said, when we try to take shortcuts, and I've testified about this before, they end up costing us a great deal of money, time, and wasted energy. If you look at HCDA, they do not have a good track record. I did not sit in as many meetings as they did, but they tried to bring in some community partners to work on this plan for over 2 years, about 3 years actually. And I sat in on some of these meetings, and then it was all completely scrapped. And none of that input was taken into consideration. And this kind of abuse of power, and people put in so much time their personal time and sacrifice, and then to be disregarded. And the PLDC is even much worse than HCDA. And the governor himself, when he was still a congressman, came out and rallied against the HCDA, saying, who was this shadow organization? How does it represent the people? And yet now we have this bill that's much worse, that's much less transparent. So we really believe that if you look at the example of the super ferry, for instance, when you try to bypass environmental regulations, it ends up costing us a great deal of money and a great deal of turmoil. These are not shortcuts. They will not fast-track development. They will lead to lawsuits and all kinds of conflicts, as we've already seen. So even though the process may need to be streamlined, that's something different. And I think the environmental community would embrace that. But this kind of fast-tracking shortcut is not in the best interest of the people and not in the best interest of preserving our land for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Kaimi Nicholson.
Aloha and mahalo. I'm here as a member of the Social Justice Council of the Unitarian Church, and
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear you. I'm sorry. There you go.
Social Justice Council of the Unitarian Church, and we do oppose this bill because it is developer-driven. There's a much better and easier way to get laptops in the hands of all the students. We definitely support that wonderful goal. But this is a dangerous way of doing it. To put public lands under private control is a very different value system than the one that we support. As we know, much of the public lands of Hawaii, and as well as the private lands, were taken through deceptive means from the Native Hawaiian people. And the Hawaiian people, the aloha spirit is one of sharing and protecting resources for the future generations. We are at a stage in our history when we realize that private ownership of public resources or natural resources, nature, aina, has caused innumerable problems. And those who are in control of those private resources are the same ones who have caused a lot of the pollution and toxicity that's hurting the health of our people. The lands around public schools are precious lands, and they should not be developed. The fact that we cannot feed ourselves on this island, that we import most of our food, is a tragic situation in my view. And the most wonderful thing that I see happening on the schools is the gardening, and I'd like to see that increasing. Teaching our children how to feed themselves is a way to promote aloha spirit for the aina. So thank you for hearing my story, and please do keep the corporate powers, the private ownership, with their goals for private profit, out of the sharing of our community resources for the good of our children. Mahalo.
Thank you. Henry Curtis.
Aloha legislators.
Aloha.
I submitted written testimony on the other 6 bills, but did not submit it on this because of wrestling with the ramifications of this bill. On the one hand, modernizing our schools and giving our kids the best opportunity for the future makes so much sense. But it should not be connected to a bill that talks about giving away our land. So if you could separate the two, it would be great to advance the interest of students without sacrificing public land. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to testify? Okay, members, questions of any of the testifiers? Representative Thieling.
Thank you. Is the Department of Education still here? And could staff turn that microphone up a little bit? It was working better and someone turned it down. if there's someone here from the staff side that could turn the mic up.
I think it's good.
Okay, you did it. All right. A few years ago, the legislature passed, I believe, a bill that would have allowed a forest city type of redevelopment of our schools. In other words, it would be the same model that's been used to upgrade all of the military housing on Oahu. And what it would mean is that working in conjunction with the school community, that the developer then would renovate, upgrade, or even in some instances build new schools, lease those, the state would pay a lease rent to the Forest City developer, and after a period of time, which generally was going to be 30 years, then the Department of Education would own those new upgraded schools. That's a process that doesn't require giving up our public lands. It's a process that would require the developer to do what the developer, in competitive, not necessarily for a city, but would allow the developer to do that. Could you just comment on that concept, please?
Absolutely, Representative. I'm not familiar with that bill. However, I am familiar with the concept. And as I understand this concept and the governor's initiative for rebuilding 21st century schools, that's exactly what we're talking about here. As I understand this concept as well, there's no land to be sold. This is a leased type arrangement. And yes, there is development involved, but from a private-public venture, especially from the military, and as all of you know, there's a very military community as well. And of the 8,000 units that are airmen, soldiers, Marines, and sailors were living in, they were substandard. And through Forest City and other development, those 9,000 units have been redeveloped, redesigned. Those lands, DOD got brand new housing for these young men and women at no cost to the government under a 55-year lease. So yes, that concept works, and it worked marvelously for the DOD.
Can I just stop you there a second? Because thank you for saying that. I think it's worked fantastically. It did not mean then that the government had to give up land for other uses. The problem I have with this bill is it isn't focused just on redeveloping the schools. It's kind of a holding the schools hostage to be able to allow other development to occur on what is termed unutilized school property or underutilized school property. And yet the Department of Education could, and the board, could go ahead and work on the Forest City concept and go ahead and let me give an example of schools in the Kailua district. There are some that have adequate land surrounding them, not to be handed off to developers, but some that have adequate land where actually a new school structure, school buildings could be constructed without really even interrupting the education of those youngsters. Once the new school buildings are constructed by a Forest City type of operation, and they're leased to the Department of Education for a 30-year period, then that same Forest City type operation could bulldoze the other schools and put in upgraded and new playing grounds. There may be a number of those schools throughout the state where there's actually adequate land that you don't even have to disrupt the students. Why isn't the department doing that, and why are we looking at letting our public lands be used by developers?
I think there's a misconception in terms of how public land, school land, or land that the schools presently sit on, whether it's county or state or ceded lands for that matter. My boss and myself, as we engage ourselves in this process, there's no appetite, first of all, to displace or close a school. In other words, if you look at the urban core and the campuses that we have spread out in the urban core, from a land value basis, that's probably where that revenue stream is probably the largest. You cannot, for instance, look at the lands on, say, neighbor islands or some of rural Oahu and say that land's going to be sold or leased to a private developer. The way I understand the concept is you find that asset that can be leveraged and you tie it to a sister campus, say in Hana or in somewhere on the Big Island. It's a systemic approach. The way I look at it, though, is from the inventory of schools that we have and the decay that those campuses are realizing, we have not built a new high school in this state in 12 years. With the capital improvement funds that we get annually, just to do the repair and maintenance of our facilities, you're never going to get there. So if I envision this concept, and again, a 21st century modeled school, which we don't have any in this state as yet, you've got to explore, at least explore the opportunity or something different in a progressive manner and how you're going to do that. As you look at population centers shifting in this state as well, and the need and the requirement for new schools, especially in central Oahu and in Maui, we have probably a 6 or 7 new build school requirement facing us with no resources to do that with. So this, again, to me, is just, you have to explore the option that this is a sound way, if done correctly, of rebuilding our schools. And it's not at the expense of selling or developing public land. It's actually looking in that and best utilizing the asset that school sits on. We built schools decades ago under a very, very archaic template of a high school needs 80 acres, a middle school needs, say, 40 acres, and an elementary school needs probably 12 or 14 acres. And those archaic models no longer exist. You can find the functionality.
I can understand all that, but you could use the forest city concept, and then we don't have developers, private developers coming into our school land. We have Forest City doing what it's done throughout the island of Oahu, and with a good track record. And you could have used that instead of this. The difficulty with this bill and all except the last 2 bills is that they are tainted with the PLDC. And it's using the same concept when another concept is available to the Department of Education. I won't go on too much further, Chair, and I can talk with the person from the Department of Education afterward. I'd really be glad to do that, because you have the opportunity to go ahead right now and upgrade public schools, lease them back, and own them in 30 years. And I wish the department would spend some time pursuing that, at least with 1 or 2 private projects, pilot projects, one, of course, on a neighbor island. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions of the testifiers? Representative Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question to the DOE and OHA, and unfortunately, because we are paperless, I couldn't read OHA's late testimony because we don't have it, or I couldn't find it. The question is, are there any of these proposed underutilized campuses on Crown land? That's the first question. Do any of you know?
I can get that for you, Representative.
Because that's probably a key factor for a lot of the Hawaiian community. Does OHA have maybe a prospect of knowing that, please?
Thank you, Representative Ward. Aloha, members and the chairs. My name is Jocelyn Doan. I'm the Senior Policy Advocate at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. So a review of SLIMS, which is the State Land Information Management System, shows that 79 schools that are under the state's control, or at least 1,500 acres, are on ceded lands, and much of which are on public land trust lands.
So 25% plus are actually ceded lands.
It may
80 out of 256?
We know from SLIMS, which is not necessarily the most accurate or comprehensive, that at least 79 schools, a significant portion of our schools are on ceded lands. Correct.
Does that give you an opinion or another statement to make because of that, or is that just a neutral fact?
Well, I apologize that we got our testimony in after 5, so you don't have it in front of you. So let me just read to you the relevant provisions of our testimony. So basically, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs maintains that the state shall not diminish the ceded lands corpus. And so we also request, and in addition to that, related, we request that HRS section 171-647 is applicable. Right now, that's the provision that would require the state to get a 2/3 legislative approval for any sale. It's not really clear to us whether or not the lands would be transferred from the DOE in fee to the HCDA or not. That's not really clear from the bill. In that case, we would want to ensure that any disposition would have to go through the process that every other state agency has to go through. Additionally, Act 178, which is related to OHA's pro rata portion of our public land trust, and Executive Order 0606, which determines how that revenue is distributed, we would request that these revenue generating opportunities comply with that, like all other state agencies.
So you are for or opposed to?
We're commenting on this.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
That's right. HCDA. Chair, if I may ask one more question.
Yes, please.
Is HCDA still here? The governor mentioned a couple times, and others have mentioned, quote, workforce housing. I know the Pohukaina building is going to be affordable housing, but I see a studio for like $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a month, and a 2 or 3 bedroom at $2,700 a month. Is workforce housing a practicable application? No, let me put it this way. Is there anybody in the private sector who thinks they're going to make workforce housing and make any money on it? Because right now we have all these incentives and nobody's interested to do affordable housing, workforce housing, or low-cost housing. They're all expensive. So what are we going to get by adding school kids, schoolyards in the process?
Representative, with all due respect, I think you have 2 questions there.
Yeah, I'm looking at market forces.
The first one was workforce housing. There is a workforce housing project that's going up at 801 South Street, and all affordability criteria is determined by the federal government and in concert with state guidelines. So, first question.
That's true, but all of the people who work at the legislature could probably qualify, or maybe most of the people in this room could qualify with those, quote, affordable 140% of poverty guidelines, et cetera. But my real question of leading up to that is, what's the private sector saying about these incentives implied by this particular bill? Are there people knocking on your door to build workforce housing? Let me make it very simple.
Actually, there are few developers approaching us for workforce housing. With respect to whether or not workforce housing would figure into any development that would occur under the mechanism of this proposal, I would have to say that it's much too early and no one has come yet.
The average cost of workforce housing is what in HCDA's experience?
Workforce housing, by our definition, would have a maximum of 140% of area median income and a low of 100% of area median income. That translates to approximately $82,700 for a family of 4 at 100%, and at 140% of area median income, that would be about $102,000 family income.
Representative Ward, thank you for the questions on workforce housing, but do you have one specific to the bill?
No, I'm just trying to see the relevance of the marketplace to what's proposed here as a hot item, and I'm not sure that I see the hotness of it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Members, any specific questions on the bill? I have one question for HCDA. In the bill itself, it says that this chapter would establish a mechanism for Hawaii Community Development Authority, a public entity which shall determine public school facility redevelopment. And then also later in the purpose clause it says the legislature finds the creation of the Hawaii Community Development Authority, the establishment of community development districts, the establishment of public school facilities redevelopment sites. My question to you, it sounds like you're in the driver's seat, but where does the DOE fit in this? Because the bill kind of puts you in kind of charge.
My reading of the bill would differ in that it's quite clear, and in my testimony I indicate that I don't believe that it's the role and responsibility for the authority to make any educational decisions, and I indicated in the testimony that we would necessarily defer to the DOE and BOE and their network of stakeholders once a district is established to make those priorities and to make their objectives and requirements known such that we can then seek to perform. It's my reading that this bill makes us a tool. HCDA wields zoning authority which can change or tap potential for school lands which might otherwise be designated, or they're currently designated as public facilities.
So instead of a site, you would create a district?
The mechanism is for governance, or our enabling statute requires that the legislature must designate a district with boundaries before we have any jurisdiction. And so I believe the intention of the measure is to designate individual sites or sites, complex, district, or county educational boundaries, facility boundaries, and then task us with the mechanism of providing information through planning and due diligence to identify what potential revenues and what partnerships might be available, which the DOE might utilize to then realize the facilities and programs that they would target for a particular site.
Thank you for answering the question. Mr. LaRue, do you have anything to add to that? Because I was just concerned that they may have, what would they be doing and working with you and your department in terms of identifying and controlling this whole mechanism of site redevelopment?
Really, just to add what to Tony, or at least be additive to his comments, is that the HCDA would be that mechanism of which the department would funnel its requirements in terms of what are the facilities development Department of Education requirements for schools funneled through his office for that development. We have our own facilities development branch, as he mentioned, and our own stakeholders with regards to how we're going to develop new schools. And the DOE, through the Board of Education, is going to maintain that authority.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Chair?
Yes. Representative Fale.
Well, for Mr. LaRue, I find this, there are, of course, a number of challenges with this bill, but I do find it, there are several things that have to be balanced here. Does this bill allow us the revenue stream? Because schools in my district, especially high school like Oahu High School, we're dying out there. Every time we get a decent dose of rain, the school floods, kids can't go to school. We have stagnant water that breeds bacteria that is on the school grounds where kids walk through on a daily basis. So there's that challenge, but then we have challenges with the lands, with ceded lands, crown lands, etc. Does this bill help us find the revenue stream to bring our schools to where they need to be without having to tax our retired citizens here in the state, without having to nickel and dime our working families? Because we're hurting. We're hurting out there, and every time I see a bill that comes through that says, okay, we need $5 for this, $10 for that, I mean, our families are hurting, but our school kids are hurting too. So does this bill, when thoroughly worked through, will it allow us to balance all those needs and make all those considerations?
if I can divorce myself just from the governance aspect of this bill and the discussion on land, I would give you an emphatically yes, Representative Fale. And I say that because, again, I'm the guy that has oversight and responsibility of looking the entire inventory of schools with the capital improvement budget that we do maintain. And that's not to mention the general fund budget for repair and maintenance that we have. And I would submit to you that there's really very little preventative maintenance money in there. It's all repair, and you're right, it's a struggle. So again, I'll go back to my earlier comment and testimony that if we do nothing different than what we're doing right now, and I know there's a lot of smart people in this room, to include in the audience, that will figure this out, but if we do nothing, we decay.
Thank you, Mr. Lura.
Chair? Yeah, Representative Hanohano.
Okay, I just want to make a point of clarification and comment. House Bill 865 was never referred, the referral was never given to Ocean Resource Management, Hawaiian Affairs, and reading through the bill, there is Hawaiian Affairs, Hawaiian issues that are at the forefront, because one of your composition for your 7 members, one is from DOE, one is a design specialist, and third, we have a Hawaiian cultural specialist. This is on page 15, and 4 at-large members. So do you have a definition of Hawaiian cultural specialist?
I don't, but I still think that this is a stakeholders, I think, group, and I think it's a community effort as well. That everybody has a stakeholder. I believe that, I don't know what the last statistic was, but I did read it through the HEPA study that I want to say it's about 69% of Native Hawaiian children do go to Hawaii State Public Schools, so therefore there's a large stakeholder as well.
Yes, so do you have a clear definition of it, or are you still researching it?
I would say I will get back to you.
Okay, thank you. And also you have 4 at-large members. Where are your 4 at-large members coming from?
And I believe my colleague Tony can speak to that. There is an amendment, as he had spoke to earlier, that does address that issue.
Okay, hopefully your 4 at-large members come from each county. I mean, because you cannot be leaving the county out.
Absolutely not.
Okay, and so you're going to get back on the definition of your Hawaiian cultural specialist and redefine these 4 at-large members.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, members. Any other questions? Okay, if not, members in the audience, what we're going to do is I've conferred with the Chair of Education and the Finance Chair, and we're going to defer and have decision-making on Monday, February 11th at 1:30 in Conference Room 309. There was a lot of testimony, and we have to digest all this and look at the proposed amendment by the administration. So with that, members, we're going to recess for 5 minutes and then reconvene for what's on the rest of the agenda. Recess.
Bye. Have fun.